There is something about fame that people rarely talk about. The moment a star, surrounded by cameras and applause, suddenly freezes because someone walked in from a completely different chapter of their life. Not a co-star, not a manager, someone from before all of it. And in that single second, every wall comes down. That is what this video is about. And I promise you, by the end, you will not be able to hold it together. We are going to start with one of the most talked about surprise reunions in recent memory, and it involves a man who spent years making the world laugh while quietly carrying a story that very few people knew. Kevin Hart is one of the biggest comedians alive. Sold out arenas, blockbuster movies, a business empire. The man has built something extraordinary. But rewind the clock to North Philadelphia in the 1990s, and you will find a kid growing up in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, with an absentee father and a mother who was working herself to the bone just to keep the lights on. He has spoken about those years in interviews, about how much of his early confidence came not from his family being stable, but from a handful of people in his community who simply believed in him when nothing in his circumstances suggested they should. In a 2022 interview, Hart broke down describing a phone call he received from one of his old neighborhood friends who had watched him on television. He had not spoken to this person in over 15 years. The friend called just to say he had watched Hart do a special and had laughed until he cried, and then said something along the lines of, "I always told people you were going to do something. I always told them." Hart said he had to put the phone down and walk away for a minute because he could not speak. He said that kind of belief, from someone who knew him when he had nothing, hit completely differently from any award or review he had ever received. That is the thing about these reunions. Fame insulates people. The people around a celebrity today often love the version of them that already made it. But the people from before, they loved the unfinished draft. Now let us talk about Viola Davis, because her story of reconnecting with her past carries a weight that is hard to fully describe. Davis grew up in Central Falls, Rhode Island, in severe poverty. She has been remarkably open about what that childhood looked like, going to school hungry, wearing secondhand clothes, navigating a world that was not designed for her to succeed. In multiple interviews and in her memoir, she has described how she found refuge in performing arts programs and local theater opportunities, and how a series of teachers and mentors recognized something in her before she could see it in herself. She has spoken about returning to Rhode Island after achieving major success and running into people from her childhood community. One story she told involved a former teacher who had cast her in a school production decades earlier, a woman who, when she saw Davis at an event, simply held her face in both hands and said nothing for a long moment. Davis recalled that she had to remind herself to breathe. She said the woman had no idea how many times Davis had thought about her during the hard years, during the years of rejection letters and callbacks that never came through. That teacher had planted a seed, and the reunion was the first time Davis could actually show her what had grown from it. That exchange stuck with a lot of people who heard it, and it speaks to something universal. When you make it somewhere, part of the joy is being able to go back and show the person who believed in you first. Moving now to the world of music, and a reunion that fans of a certain era of pop culture found genuinely moving. Alicia Keys has been candid throughout her career about the role music education played in her life growing up in New York City. She started playing piano at age 7, attended the Professional Performing Arts School in Manhattan, and has repeatedly credited the teachers and mentors she encountered there as being foundational to everything she has built. In interviews around her memoir and various television appearances, she has described moments of running into former instructors or classmates, people who remember her practicing scales at the piano during lunch breaks, who remember her before the Grammy stage was even a concept in her mind. In one appearance on a talk show, she described being at a benefit event and spotting a woman across the room who had been her piano instructor when she was 9 years old. She said she essentially stopped mid-sentence in her conversation and excused herself and just walked over. The instructor did not immediately recognize her at first. It had been decades, and Keys said the moment when recognition clicked on the woman's face was one of the purest things she had ever witnessed. The instructor apparently said something like, "You kept going. You just kept going." Keys said she had to hold herself together because she did not want to become a complete mess in the middle of a crowded room. She has said in multiple contexts that she thinks about the people who shaped her early musical foundation, not as footnotes, but as co-authors of her story. And that framing co-authors feels exactly right. Let us shift to something a little different, because not all of these reunions involve tears. Some involve laughter and the specific joy of two people who share a history, suddenly being in the same room again after years of living completely separate lives. Dwayne Wade, the retired NBA legend, has done several events and podcast appearances where he has talked about the friendships he formed in Chicago before basketball took over his entire life. He grew up in Robbins, Illinois, and the early friendships he formed there had a very different texture than the relationships he developed in the NBA. These were kids who played together in parking lots and church gyms before anyone had a contract or an agent. In one interview, Wade described running into a childhood friend at a family barbecue after several years of not seeing each other. He said they fell into the exact same dynamic within about 40 seconds, the same jokes, the same way of talking to each other, the same comfortable shorthand that had developed when they were teenagers. He said something that many people found striking, that his NBA teammates knew the champion, but his childhood friends knew the kid who was not sure any of this was going to work out. And spending time with people who knew that kid, he said, keeps him from drifting too far from who he actually is. That idea, being anchored by the people who knew you before the world decided you mattered, came up again and again in stories celebrities tell about reunions with their past. Now, I want to spend a little time on a category of reunion that does not get discussed enough. The celebrity who reconnects not with a childhood friend or a teacher, but with a mentor they had in their very first professional experience. Someone who saw them at the beginning of the career, before the trajectory was clear. Lupita Nyong'o is a great example. Before her Academy Award, before the global recognition, she was a young woman studying theater at the Yale School of Drama, and before that she was doing early work in Kenya in film and theater. She has described mentors and professors who pushed her during those formative training years in ways that were not always comfortable. People who challenged her vision of herself and demanded more. After her Oscar win for 12 Years a Slave, she spoke publicly about reaching out to some of those mentors. She described one particular phone call with a professor who had been demanding and exacting and, at the time, occasionally terrifying. She said the professor told her that he had known she had it, but he was not going to tell her that then because she needed the fire, not the comfort. Nyong'o said she laughed and told him that approach had absolutely worked. And then she said she thanked him properly for the first time. Not just a courteous acknowledgement, but a real, specific thank you for every hard conversation that had prepared her for the moments that mattered. That kind of reunion, where the gratitude is finally allowed to be fully expressed, is a special thing. Here's a story that veers into unexpected territory, because sometimes the reunion is not a planned event. Sometimes it is just life, completely unscripted, colliding with itself in a grocery store or a parking lot or the hallway of an airport. Dolly Parton, who is beloved not just for her music, but for her generosity and her sense of humor, has told stories over the years about running into people from her childhood in rural Tennessee. Parton grew up in extreme poverty in Sevier County, one of 12 children, and she has never pretended otherwise. She has built her entire brand on the honesty of that origin story. She has described occasions where she has been back in her home region and crossed paths with people who remember her from before anyone outside of a few counties had ever heard of her. She tells these stories with warmth and humor, noting that sometimes the person will look at her and start listing things she probably does not remember. A particular church service, a school talent show, a summer afternoon from 50 years ago, and she will say that she does remember, because she remembers all of it. She has said that part of why she does so much work investing in her home region is because those people, the ones who remember her when she was just a girl from the hills with a big voice and a bigger dream, are the people she is ultimately still singing for. That might be the most generous version of what a reunion can mean. Not just a moment of recognition between two individuals, but a lifelong commitment to the community that made you. There's one more story that I think deserves its own moment, because it touches on something different from all the others. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the NBA's all-time leading scorer for decades, has written extensively and spoken publicly about his relationship with his high school basketball coach at Power Memorial Academy in New York City, Jack Donahue. That relationship was formative and also complicated in ways that evolved over time. Early in Abdul-Jabbar's career, there were tensions and misunderstandings, but he has described, in his writing and in interviews, the process of working through that history and eventually reaching a place of genuine understanding and forgiveness. He has written about what it meant to him as an adult to look back at a mentorship that was imperfect, as almost all mentorships are, and to see it clearly without the distortions of youth or resentment. The reunion with that history, with the memory of who he was as a teenager and what he needed and what he received, became a kind of internal reunion as much as a literal one. He has said that understanding where you come from, including the complicated parts, is the only real way to understand who you are now, and that the teachers and coaches who shaped you, even imperfectly, deserve to be seen in full, not flattened into either heroes or villains. That kind of reflection, meeting your past clearly and with maturity, might be the deepest version of the reunion story. So what is it that all of these moments have in common? Fame creates a kind of temporal displacement. You are living in the present at high speed, surrounded by new people and new pressures, and the person you used to be starts to feel like a character in a story rather than yourself. And then someone walks through a door, a teacher, a neighbor, an old friend, a childhood coach, and suddenly both timelines collapse into one. You are the person you are now and the person you were then, simultaneously. And it is overwhelming in the best possible way. These moments matter because they are honest. In an industry built on performance, on managed public images, and carefully crafted narratives, the reunion strips all of that away. The celebrity in that moment is not a brand. They are a person. Someone who grew up somewhere, who needed things, who was shaped by specific people in specific places, and who, despite everything that has happened since, has not fully left those people behind. The old friend does not care about the box office numbers or the streaming figures or the award nominations. They care about the person they knew. And being seen that way, being known at that level, is something no amount of success can replicate. That is why these reunions, whether they happen on a television stage or in a grocery store parking lot or during a phone call in the middle of the night, have a power that is almost impossible to describe. Because what they are really about is